Mercedes just got the confirmation its rivals were waiting for. The FIA is shutting down the 18-to-1 engine loophole before Monaco. But here is the shocking part. This ban may arrive too late to change anything. Because if Mercedes gained even a tiny advantage while the engine was measured cold, those points are already gone. Those races are already written. And the rivals cannot get that time back. Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull wanted the FIA to expose Mercedes. But now they face a much bigger fear. What if Mercedes passes the new hot measurement? What if the engine stays fast? What if the rule changes, the paddock explodes, and the team at the center of the scandal walks into Monaco almost untouched? That would mean this was never just an engine fight. It was a rulebook failure. A cold engine can look legal. A hot engine can tell a different story. And before Monaco, Formula One is about to find out whether Mercedes crossed the line, or simply found the line before everyone else knew where it was. Subscribe to the channel. At first, this looks like the moment Mercedes finally gets cornered. The FIA confirms the 18-to-1 loophole is being shut down. The rivals get the action they demanded. The hot measurement arrives before Monaco. And the entire paddock waits for the same thing. A drop. A weakness. A sign that Mercedes had been carrying an advantage that should never have survived the first race. But Formula One rarely gives its rivals the clean revenge they want. Because the moment the FIA confirms a ban, another question appears immediately. What exactly is being banned? The trick itself? The advantage? The measurement gap? Or only the version of the loophole that became too public to ignore? That is where this story becomes dangerous. Because an engine rule is not just a number written on paper. It is a number tied to a test. And if the test changes after the season has already started, then every team has to ask the same uncomfortable question. Were we racing under the same rule, or only under the same wording? That difference matters. A rule is what the FIA writes. A measurement is how the FIA proves it. And in Formula One, if the measurement is incomplete, the smartest team in the room can turn that weakness into performance. That is why the Mercedes controversy exploded. Not because compression ratio is exciting by itself. It is not. Most fans do not wake up thinking about combustion chamber volume, piston movement, or thermal expansion. But they do care about fairness. They care about whether one team found a hidden advantage that everyone else was too late to copy. They care about whether the FIA acted fast enough. They care about whether a championship can be shaped by something almost nobody can see. And this Mercedes story lives exactly there. Inside the engine. Inside the rulebook. Inside the space between legal and fair. The key idea is compression ratio. It sounds technical, but it is actually simple. Inside the engine, air and fuel are squeezed before they burn. The tighter they are squeezed, the more energy the engine can usually extract from the explosion. Think of it like pressing down on a spring. A small press gives you a small release. A stronger press gives you more force. That force can become power. It can become efficiency. It can become a cleaner exit from a corner, a stronger pull down a straight, or just enough speed to make a rival's attack fail before it begins. That is why the FIA wanted a limit. The new engine rules were supposed to bring the compression ceiling down from 18-to-1 to 16-to-1. That was supposed to be a clear line. Not a suggestion. Not a target. A limit. 16-to-1. Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull powertrains were all supposed to live under it. But the problem was never only the number. The problem was when that number was measured. Cold, an engine is calm. The parts sit in one shape. The combustion chamber has one volume. The piston reaches one position. Everything can be inspected in a controlled state. But a Formula One engine does not race in that state. When it runs, it gets hot. Very hot. And when metal gets hot, it expands. It moves. It changes the tiny spaces inside the engine. And tiny spaces are where this controversy lives. According to the source material, the Mercedes concept centered on using materials that expand with heat in a carefully calculated way. Cold, the engine could sit within the 16-to-1 limit. Hot, the geometry could change enough for the engine to behave closer to 18-to-1. That is why rivals were furious. Because from their point of view, Mercedes had not simply found a few extra horsepower. Mercedes had found a way to pass the test in one state, then gain performance in another. That feels very different. It feels like the car has two versions. The version the FIA checks, and the version the rivals race. And once that idea enters the paddock, trust starts to break. A fast lap no longer looks like just a fast lap. A strong straight line run no longer looks like just good engineering. A Mercedes-powered car defending well no longer looks like normal racecraft. Everything becomes suspicious. That is why Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull pushed so hard. They were not only trying to slow Mercedes down. They were trying to force the FIA to admit that cold measurement was not enough. And now, with hot measurement arriving before Monaco, the FIA has effectively confirmed that heat matters. That is the part that cannot be ignored. If heat did not matter, there would be no need to change the procedure. If cold measurement told the full story, there would be no reason to introduce the hot check. So the ban is not just a technical update. It is a confession that the old system left room for a fight. But that confession creates a new problem. If the old system was incomplete, what do you do with the races already run under it? You cannot replay them. You cannot give rivals back lost track position. You cannot return points that may have been influenced by a hidden efficiency gain. You cannot erase the confidence Mercedes may have gained from knowing its engine had a margin others did not. That is why the rivals are still angry, even after getting the ban. Because the ban protects the future. It does not repair the past. And in a championship, the past is not gone. It sits in the standings. Every point already scored remains alive. Every early advantage, if it existed, continues to matter long after the rule changes. That is the brutal reality of Formula One. A loophole does not need to last all year. It only needs to last long enough to change the shape of the fight. A few races can be enough. A few tenths can be enough. A few strategic choices made with more confidence can be enough. That is why the phrase "just before Monaco" is so important. Monaco is not simply another race on the calendar. It is the weekend where the new measurement becomes impossible to ignore. It is the place where the FIA's decision stops being a meeting room compromise and becomes a live pressure test. And Mercedes knows everyone will be watching. Not just the FIA. The rivals. The media. The fans. The customer teams. Every engineer who wondered whether the loophole was real. Every rival who felt the season began with an unfair edge. Every team principal who wanted the FIA to move sooner. Monaco becomes the first public stage of the new truth. But even that truth may not be clean. Because passing a hot measurement does not automatically prove the entire controversy was exaggerated. It only proves the engine passed that measurement, under those conditions, at that moment. And in Formula One, conditions are everything. Temperature matters. Load matters. Operating windows matter. Inspection procedures matter. If the FIA chooses one hot measurement point, Mercedes can prepare for that point. That is not a conspiracy. That is how elite engineering works. Teams do not only build cars to race. They build cars to pass tests. They study the rule. They study the test. They study the exact conditions. Then they design the fastest possible machine that survives the inspection. So if Mercedes knew the hot measurement was coming, then Monaco was not a surprise ambush. It was a target. A deadline. A problem to solve. And Mercedes is at its most dangerous when the problem is clearly defined. That is why rivals fear the worst outcome is not Mercedes failing. The worst outcome is Mercedes passing. If Mercedes fails, the story is simple. The rivals were right. The FIA caught the issue. Mercedes loses the advantage. The ban has teeth. But if Mercedes passes, and still looks fast, the story becomes much harder to swallow. Because then the FIA can say the car is legal. Mercedes can say the rivals overreacted. And Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull are left arguing against a result that is now protected by the new procedure. That is the nightmare. A ban that makes the controversy harder to fight, not easier. Because once Mercedes passes under the confirmed hot measurement, the team gains something extremely valuable. Legitimacy. And legitimacy can be more powerful than horsepower. It gives Mercedes a shield. It lets the team say, "We passed the cold check, now we passed the hot check, so what exactly are you accusing us of?" That question is very hard for rivals to answer publicly. Because their argument becomes less about rule breaking, and more about timing. They will say the ban came too late. They will say the early races were affected. They will say the hot measurement temperature may not capture the full operating behavior. They will say Mercedes had time to adapt. They may be right. But it is harder to win that argument once the FIA's own test has been passed. That is why the revolt against Mercedes is also a revolt against the FIA's timeline. The teams did not just want a change. They wanted a change before the advantage could matter. They wanted the loophole closed before points were scored. They wanted the new era to begin with the right measurement, not discover it halfway through the opening chapter. That is the wound. And it is not healed by one inspection. Because the source material makes clear that rival pressure came early, after the technical leak exposed the thermal concept. Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull wanted action. But the FIA's first conclusion was that the engine technically complied with the regulation as written. Those words matter. Technically complied. They do not sound like a moral victory for the rivals. They sound like Mercedes surviving on the wording. And in Formula One, surviving on wording can be completely legitimate. but it can still make the paddock furious. Because the spirit of the rule and the letter of the rule are not always the same thing. The spirit was simple. Stop engines from operating in the old 18-to-1 world. The letter, according to the controversy, did not fully define the temperature condition. Mercedes may have lived in that gap. And if it did, the team did not need to break the written rule. It only needed to read it more aggressively than everyone else. That is why this story is so divisive. To Mercedes supporters, this looks like elite Formula One thinking. The rulebook left a space. Mercedes found it. The FIA inspected the engine. The engine complied. That is innovation. That is the sport. But to rival fans, it looks different. It looks like the purpose of the new rule was undermined by a measurement loophole. It looks like the FIA reacted only after the damage had started. It looks like Mercedes carried a benefit that others could not copy in time. And both sides have enough logic to keep arguing. That is what makes this controversy so difficult to kill. It does not give one clean villain. It gives competing truths. Mercedes may be legal. Rivals may be right to be angry. The FIA may be technically consistent. The original rule may still have been incomplete. All of those things can be true at once. And when that happens, Formula One becomes combustible. Because the sport runs on clarity, but thrives on conflict. The fans want to know who is right. The teams want to protect their interests. The FIA wants to control the narrative. Mercedes wants to turn the ban into proof that it did nothing wrong. Rivals want the ban to prove the exact opposite. And Monaco becomes the place where everyone looks for signs. Not just results. Signs. Does Mercedes lose speed? Does the power delivery look different? Do the customer teams suddenly drop back? Does McLaren, Williams, or Alpine show any change compared with previous weekends? Do Ferrari and Honda-powered cars look closer? Does Red Bull's own situation reveal that the concept was not only a Mercedes idea, but a wider gray area? Every detail will be watched. Because after a technical scandal, no lap is innocent. That is the emotional cost of this kind of controversy. It makes the sport harder to enjoy cleanly. A normal performance swing becomes a clue. A good sector becomes evidence. A bad sector becomes confirmation. A strong race becomes suspicious. A weak race becomes a confession. Even when the reality may be more complicated, the paddock will search for meaning in everything. And Mercedes has to race inside that storm. The team cannot simply say, the car is legal, and expect the noise to vanish. Legal is not the same as trusted. A car can pass inspection and still leave rivals convinced the process came too late. A team can comply with the new test and still face anger over the old one. That is the burden Mercedes carries into Monaco. Not only performance pressure, narrative pressure. The pressure of proving that its speed is not dependent on a loophole everyone now believes had to be closed. And that pressure can affect decisions. Engineers may become more cautious. Drivers may feel the spotlight. Strategists may know every strong moment will be judged differently. The team may have to balance not only speed and reliability, but perception. Because perception matters in Formula One. Especially when the FIA is involved. If the governing body looks weak, the rivals push harder. If Mercedes looks untouched, the rivals speak louder. If the ban changes nothing visible, the controversy becomes a weapon for every team that feels disadvantaged. That is why this story will not end with a single hot measurement before Monaco. The confirmed ban is only the start of the next argument. The first argument was, did Mercedes exploit the loophole? The second argument is, did the FIA close it properly? The third argument will be, did the early season advantage already matter too much? And that third argument may be the most dangerous of all. Because it cannot be solved with one test. It lives in the championship table. It lives in memory. It lives in the feeling that the clock started before everyone was playing under the same measurement reality. That is why Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull are revolting so hard. They understand that a technical clarification after the fact can feel like a victory and a loss at the same time. Victory, because the FIA finally acknowledged the problem. Loss, because Mercedes may already have gained what it needed from the old procedure. And if Monaco shows no dramatic change, that loss will feel even deeper. The rivals will ask what the ban actually achieved. They will ask why the FIA did not act sooner. They will ask whether the test was designed to solve the issue, or simply contain the politics. That is a brutal accusation. But Formula One teams think brutally when performance is at stake.